Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist, and today we're going to be doing an S-Force deck profile. So I'm really excited for this one because this deck is a really fun deck that works with columns. It's a deck that I've been playing around with a lot with recently, and it's really an interesting deck the way that it functions because of the way that the columns work. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Mech Knights and Magical Musketeers, which I love column-based decks because it really makes your opponent think as they're playing against you, which is really fun. So without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell in there so you can come part of the notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below for all those awesome rewards, like getting your name description in a single video, getting assigned cards in the mail, and even getting to request a deck profile every single month you're a patron, along with test hands. So without further ado, let's get straight on into this. So first off, we're going to be playing 3 copies of S-Force Rappa. Rappa is really good, and it's probably the card that you want to see first out of all the cards in your entire deck. Because what this card does is each of your opponent's monsters in the same column as one of your S-Force monsters, which that's usually the common effect that they give them debuffs as you're playing the deck, with them being in different columns. But each of your opponent's monsters in the same column as one of your S-Force monsters can only target the monster for an attack in the same column, which is really kind of cool that you can only target that monster for attacks. And then quick effect, you can banish one S-Force card from your hand to return this card to the hand, and if you do, you get to special summon an S-Force monster from your deck in defense position except another copy of itself. So this card is the card that you want to see first, and I love the artwork for this card, and it's actually the reason I picked the entire deck up. We then play 3 copies of S-Force Razor's Edge. Razor Edge, or Edge Razor, is really good. Edge Razor has the ability that each of your S-Force, or each of your opponent's monsters in the same column as one of your S-Force monsters, cannot be used as a material for a link summon of a link 3 or higher monster. And if this card is normal or special summon, you can special summon an S-Force monster from your hand in attack position except another copy of this card, which is what I was kind of waiting on to do the profile for this card, was Edge Razor. Edge Razor is such a good card for this deck, and it really was needed before you actually really picked this deck up. We then play 2 of, Orphis. Orphis is kind of a neat card. And what it does is your opponent cannot target any of their monsters in the same column as your S-Force monsters with effects, which is really kind of neat. And it also has the ability that when a monster your opponent controls activates its effect, then you can quick effect target one of your banished S-Force cards from your hand and destroy that monster, which is pretty good that you just banish an S-Force from the hand. They don't really care about banishing, so it's really easy to kind of pop off with this card. We then played 3 copies of Gravitino. Gravitino is a really neat card as well. Gravitino is a level 5, but there's a lot of cards like Rappa that you're going to be able to special summon it from deck, but it's a really good card because each of your opponent's monsters in the same column as an S-Force monster. S-Force monster is banished when it leaves the field, and if this card is normal or special summon, you can add an S-Force card from your deck to your hand except another copy of itself, so it's a really powerful card. We then play 3 copies of Platina. Platina is also a really good card because she has the ability that each of your opponent's monsters in the same column as one of your S-Force monsters loses 600 attack, and if this card is normal or special summon, you can target one of your banished S-Force monsters except another copy itself and special summon it. So it's really easy to just special summon her off of Rappa and then grab something that's banished and summon it back to your side of the field. I then played just a single copy of Dog Tag. Dog Tag to me is a one of. I do not want to play more than one of this card. I thought about playing 2, but then I kind of just dropped it down. It's a great special summon, but what it does is during your main phase, your opponent cannot activate the effects of monsters in the same column as your S-Force monsters. And if your opponent normal or special summons a monster while you control an S-Force monster, then you can special summon this card from your hand. It clogs at any more than 1. It's easy to get out of the deck, and it's really a great Cyber Dragon-ish card. It's actually the reverse stats of Cyber Dragon, being a light level 5 machine monster with 1621. If you flip the attack and defense, it would pretty much be a Cyber Dragon. It's a good card, don't get me wrong, but I just feel like if I played in any more than maybe 2, that it clogs. And so I've thought about dropping a Platina for a second copy of it, but I don't feel like any more than 2 would be needed. We then play 3 copies of Dimensional Shifter. This deck really does not care if the cards are banished. It actually helps this deck to be able to banish cards. And you usually do want to just use this card right off the bat, that if you control no card, or if you have no cards in your graveyard, you just immediately discard this card. Into the end phase, any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead, which really helps out you and really kind of set your opponent back. So this card is a 3 of, is just absolutely necessary. We play 3 copies of Ash Blossom to round out the monsters. Basically what this card does, if you guys are unfamiliar, which you probably aren't, but basically just stop your opponent from touching the deck, which is really good. So that's it for the monsters, guys. Let's get into the spells. So for the spells, we're going to be playing a single copy of Terraforming. The Terraforming is to get to your field spell, which is an extremely good card. I really love what the field spell does for this deck. One copy of Rhoda. Rhoda is also really good in this deck because you can grab Rappa from the deck, which is really, really good because Rappa is a warrior monster. We play 3 copies of S-Force Bridgehead. Bridgehead is a fantastic field spell that is not overly overpowered, but it's really good for what the deck does. When this card is activated, you get to add an S-Force monster from your deck to your hand, and then when an opponent's monster declares an attack on your S-Force monsters in the same column, then you can activate the effect that that monster you control cannot be destroyed by battle, and you only use the effect of this card once per turn, which is a pretty good effect. We then play 3 copies of S-Force Showdown. S-Force Showdown is kind of neat because it actually ties in a lot of other cards into the archetype. Like, a lot of them are kind of like dimensional monsters that go through like dimensions to be able to like enforce security, which is kind of neat because they're actually security force, which is what the S stands for. But what it does is it lets you special summon an S-Force monster in your hand to defense, and then you get to target a S-Force monster in the graveyard and add it back to your hand. But being able to special summon the monster in your hand is usually going to be the effect that you're going to go off with, because Gravitino and Platina are both high levels, and so this card comes in really handy to just be able to throw them directly on the field. We then play for the last 3 spells. We're just playing 3 Pot of Extravagance because you don't super care about the extra deck. You just play a bunch of tech cards in the extra deck because you're basically playing out of the main deck with all of your monsters. So this card comes in really handy to just help you get out a lot of your cards. The only thing that you're ever really summoning is tech monsters or Justify. Justify is really good, but this card is just really good to be able to let you draw additional cards in the deck. So that's it for the spells, guys. Let's get into the traps. So for the traps, we're playing 2 copies of S-Force Speckman. Speckman is a good 2 of in the deck. I probably wouldn't play it any more than 2, but if your opponent controls a monster, you can target one of your S-Force monsters that's banished or in the graveyard and special summon it to your field in the same column as that opponent's monster. And you can banish this card from the graveyard to target one S-Force monster you control and move that target to another of your monster zones, which is pretty good to help you kind of like move your cards around. It's really kind of neat because this card is actually the professor that's in the S-Force archetype, and Cyframe Driver like duking it out, which is kind of neat. And it also actually ties into another archetype back in Showdown, which that's actually Time Thief Redoer. And then the next card that we actually have in the archetype, which is S-Force Chase, ties in IP Masquerena into the archetype as well. So you have like 3 different cards that are tying in different archetypes, which is kind of neat, which is Dog Tag and Rampa chasing down your copy of your IP Masquerena, which is kind of cute. But this card is really good for the deck as well, because what this card does is basically let you target any of your opponent's monsters, or you get to target cards your opponent controls up to the number of S-Force monsters you currently control with different names and return them to the hand. So basically a massive compulsive evacuation device, which is kind of neat. And if an S-Force monster you control would banish a card from your hand to activate its effect, you can banish a card from your graveyard instead, which is pretty good. We then play 3 copies of There Can Only Be One, because if you haven't noticed about this deck, pretty much your S-Force is kind of like a team. It's made up of a bunch of different people with different types, which is kind of neat. I like that. I really like the way that the deck is built up, because basically you're playing spellcasters, you're playing machines, psychics, cyvers, and warriors. So you have a lot of different typings in this. So you have a lot of different like utility for There Can Only Be One, which is really nice because it really hurts the opponent and it doesn't really do anything to you, which is really nice. So that's it for the main deck, guys. Let's get into the extra deck. So remember, it is an extravagance-based build, so you don't have to play every single one of these cards. You can bump up cards you feel like you need more of, and you can kind of turn away from other cards you think are too expensive. But Justify is definitely a 3 of. You got to play 3 Justify, because what this card does, it just is really great. The link arrows look absolutely terrible, but they're actually really good. It takes 3 effect monsters, including an S-Force monster, to summon this card, and you cannot summon set monsters to zone this card points to. I can't, but you can. But it has the ability that you can quick effect. You can target one face-up effect monster opponent controls, negate its effects until the end of the turn, and then you can move that monster to a zone that this card points to, and you can only use the effect of this card once per turn. And at the start of the damage step, if this card attacks, you can banish all monsters this card currently points to, which justifies the effect. It basically just banishes everything that it points to, which is kind of neat. It kind of reminds me of the Topologic Dragon, kind of like board wiping with zones that it points to, which is kind of neat. They're just kind of completely board wiping. It's really a great card. I really like what it does, and it helps out the deck a lot. We then play a single copy of the Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. This card comes in handy every so often to be able to summon this card, because you do swarm the field and you use opponent's monsters to link summon this card. Appaloosa, because you can summon Appaloosa and just get yourself additional negates, which is really nice. Access Code Talker, because you can pop cards on the field, which is also really good for the deck. Transcode, because you do play Cyverse cards in the deck. This card also comes in really handy, especially helping you climb to link 4s. One copy of Unicorn, because it helps you bounce stuff. And Phoenix, because it pops spells and traps. Cerberus, because it pops monsters, which is also really nice. Update Jammer, it's really easy to actually go into this card. In this deck, it's a really easy card to go into, and it's really nice to help you go into your copy of your Access Code Talker. I really like what this card does for the deck. You play a single copy of Splash Mage. The Splash Mage comes up every so often. Again, these are all just kind of suggestion cards. You don't have to play any of them. They just kind of help out the deck. The Splash Mage is a card I actually consider dropping the Update Jammer, but it's just kind of there. But what the copy of Splash Mage does, it helps you target Cyverse monsters in the graveyard and special summon them in defense position, which is really helpful just to be able to get you additional monsters on your side of the field, which is really nice to be able to just get you those monsters back from the graveyard. IP, because IP helps out a lot in this deck, and it's kind of tied into the archetype a little bit. We play a single copy of the Constellar Pleiades, because you do play light level 5 monsters, so you can go into this card pretty easily to get you additional bounces. And then a single copy of Constellar Pleiades, or Constellar Ptolemaeus, or not Ptolemaeus, but M7. M7 is really good because this card has the ability to throw it on top of the Pleiades, and then it can also bounce cards from the graveyard, which is pretty good because once per turn you can detach material from this card, target a monster on the field or any of your player's graveyard, and return that target to hand. So you can target cards in your graveyard and give them back to you, which is really nice. The other reason I was going to say about Update Jammer is it comes up every so often, but sometimes I hit it with the Extravagance. So I've thought about dropping it and maybe the Cerberus for another Splash Mage and another copy of maybe, like, I don't know, Phoenix or IP. I thought about bumping up the IP and the Unicorn up to 2 each, which I was thinking about dropping these 2 monsters for those because those help me bounce stuff. But these are kind of all just suggestion cards. So that's it for the deck, guys. It's a really fun deck to be able to play around with. It's fairly budget. It's kind of fallen under the radar, which is kind of neat. It's kind of neat that this card this deck has, because it's so budget now. And it's really fun. Like, the deck is actually really fun to be able to play around with because your opponent kind of plays in it. It's like, oh yeah, you can't do that. Surprise, as force effect, you got to play by my rules, which is fun. I really like the way the deck plays, and I hope you guys give it a try. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, guys. Hit the bell on there so you can become part of the notification squad, and we'll see you guys in the next videos. See you later, guys.